Welcome to the City Current Show, powered by Higginbotham. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference and powering the good. And we love giving you valuable content. And so we're honored to be with Steve Baer, Field CTO America with Trustwave and Trustwave Government Solutions. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, we get to talk all about cybersecurity, risk management, technology, and innovation. And so let's start with a little bit of your personal background, because I think you've got an interesting story personally, and then we'll talk all about Trustwave. But give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. Don't let my boyish good looks fool you. I've been in cyber for about 25 years. Started out in banking, financial services. I ran a division of IT risk at JP Morgan Chase. And then I went to go work in the provider umbrella, right? So I worked for companies like RSA and Dell SecureWorks and Trustwave. I did some vCISO consulting for a number of organizations. I did a stint in e-commerce to learn how all that worked. But I've been around cybercrime, cybersecurity for a while. I'm currently on the board of directors of the U.S. Secret Service Electronic Crimes Task Force in Chicago. So we get to see a lot of things that are happening in the world. And Trustwave also gives me a very unique lens to examine cybercrime.
Absolutely. Well, I think some of that's probably top secret, so we can't go into it on this show. But we'll save that for another show. Sure. But talk about Trustwave. Go ahead and give us some context.
Sure. So Trustwave has been in business for about 25 years. Grew out of the payment card industry space. They were what's called a PFI, or primary forensic investigator. So if there was a credit card breach anywhere in the world, they were investigating it. We were investigating it. I've been there about 12 years now. So we have a division of our unique cyber hunting team called Spider Labs. And so these are the guys that know the who and the what and the how of cybercrime, or as I like to say, scare you off the internet kind of stuff. So they do a lot of dark web research. They do about 2,000 breach investigations a year. So all of that secret sauce, that telemetry, that intelligence feeds our managed services platform. So when we monitor and manage technology for organizations, we bring all of that with us. So very unique lens. We also teach digital forensics and incident response to the U.S. federal government. And so they learn from us. That's our playbook. And so the aim is to make all of us better. So.
When you look at your vantage points, because obviously when you talk about working with the government and having the wide reach, I mean, you get to see a lot. Mm-hmm. Talk about how that's able to then benefit, obviously, the client, because there's a huge benefit there.
Sure. So for us, that's like almost like a one-way gate. Right, but in the commercial world, we still do just as many breach investigations. That same group of individuals that maybe is not read in, or maybe not delegated explicitly to the government space, but they understand the cybercrime landscape. Right, they understand what's happening, what those adversaries are doing. We test everything from submarines to rocket ships, right? Medical devices, it doesn't matter. So we look at it from that lens of the cyber criminal doesn't care that an institution owns it. They don't care that you're a school district, for example. They don't care that you're at a university or a healthcare provider. You represent a target or an opportunity for them to monetize something, to do whatever needs to be done for them to make money. Right. So whether that's bandwidth, for example, the criminal adversary sees that as the fire hose. That's the cannon to go do bad stuff. That's a DDoS attack mechanism. Or distributed computing, workstations, school districts, call centers, all of those things look like bot networks. So we see it all.
Talk about collaboration, because you take a very collaborative approach, Stillwater ecosystem, mm-hmm. Higginbotham, just to name two. So talk about collaboration.
So we sit in that unique position of collaborating with organizations that really bring impactful solutions to their end clients. Right, we wouldn't be here without them as well, and so they occupy that personal touch to those companies. Right, they provide like a tailored fit white glove to a lot of their businesses, and we as partners to them come in and provide those quality services. And in cyber, you don't want one guy doing everything. And so what's great about that ecosystem with Stillwater and others is that they bring in the right provider to do maybe a managed service, but then another organization to do proper testing, prevent that collusion, have that separation of duties, and so that all of those bases get covered, but you don't have one guy doing all your homework and checking all your homework.
When you talk about the true cost, so the true cost of cyber risk, cyber management, these attacks, what does that mean to you?
So to me, I look at it as first, the problem that exists is most organizations think they're going to have a bad day or a bad week in a cyber incident. The reality is they're probably going to have a bad year. We need to measure, and we do measure, the true cost of cybercrime over the course of a year. Now take ransomware, for example. And then you start to break these things down into what I like to call the ripple effect of a breach. You go days 1 through 30, you know exactly what that's going to cost you. What is my insurance premium going to cost me? What does disaster recovery look like? Do I have to bring in third-party consultants? So all of that is very quantifiable, right? You go out days 31 through 60. If I'm in a prolonged DR scenario, most organizations don't plan for that. Third-party legal, right? Why do you get third-party legal? So you have attorney-client privilege. So now I'm getting an outside resource. Maybe third-party media relations to help me manage the social brand or the impact of that. You start to look at what that costs. 60 through 61 through 90 out to even 365. When you're paying for credit protection, right? Credit protection is usually $18 a user. 48 states have different data privacy laws, so that gets expensive. If you've got 25 to 50,000 users in your database, you don't get to pick and choose. You're paying for all of that. Breach notification, right? So most of those states have a clause about breach notification. You're paying a third party to do those things. So all of that starts to add up. Now start to think about the countermeasures, the preventive mechanisms, the technology that you're putting in place. Or in some cases, if law enforcement's involved, the technology that you might have to replace because it's been confiscated. Right, you lost that in the investigation. So do you look at the start to a start of event to a year later? Real world examples. City of Atlanta paid $56,000 in a ransom, and it wasn't like the bad guy said, "Hey, give me $56K and we're good." It probably started out like $200,000, $300,000. They hired a negotiator. They whittled it down. There was a Bitcoin transaction, $56K to the bad guy. Okay, by the time that year transpired, they're north of $16 million to recover. And so for some businesses, these are door closing events. These are shutdown events. They can't afford sometimes to even pay the ransoms. And they've grown out of a cottage industry to a real big business. And the bad guys operate from countries where it's not illegal. It's probably encouraged. Go ahead, American institutions. We don't care all day long. They're never going to get caught. They're never going to get prosecuted. They can buy and rent the infrastructure and the tools that they need to get into the game. And then, at the end of a week, $60,000 in a ransom, people pay it. To a bad guy, it's 200, 300, 400% return on investment. Right? The problem's not going to go away.
Yeah, and it only gets worse, just like you're talking about. Once the doors open, the floodgates.
Right. 85% of companies that get hit again. And it might not be another ransom, but it might be an extortion, or it might be some other piece of it. In our business, what our Spider Labs team finds is an event we call modular malware. Okay, so think of a freight train, right? Train pulls into that organization. That's a compromise. Organization gets hit with one car. There's 74 other cars on that train. Right, so here's some espionage, here's some credential theft, here's some bot network, here's some DDoS. It's all for sale. It's all for rent. They don't care.
We're definitely going to come back and talk about tips, because I want to be proactive, especially for business owners, business leaders, sharing some tips. But what has your attention? Because when you talk about some of the buzzwords you've thrown out, the dark web, ransomware, phishing, things like that, what are the trends that really have your attention right now?
So ransomware is not going to go away. We kind of thought it would pinnacle, and it's not hitting the peak. And now you have cyber gangs, if you will, that will do things like 60-40 campaigns. Well, they'll give the new guys everything they need, right, to get started in a campaign, and they kick back 40% to the house, and it's pure profit to them. So there's almost zero barrier to entry for them to do bad things. So that's still going to happen. You're always going to have a cyber event, right? There's no silver bullets in our business. It really comes down to due diligence and constantly updating your security practice and your program.
And that's a good tip right there to kick off. So talk about some of the tips. When you talk about being proactive and obviously safeguarding your business and, everything that we're talking about, how do you safeguard? And obviously you and the company play a vital role in that and the collaborative partners that we talked about. But go ahead and share some tips.
Yeah, so reach out to your partners. Stillwater is a great example. They bring everybody to the table. But start with things like securing the low-hanging fruit, right? Do those tests. Do those tests that are impactful. Test the way a bad guy would. It doesn't break the bank. You're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get smarter around this stuff. But you got to move it forward. Securing email. Email is still a big entry point for the cyber criminal. Testing that infrastructure, testing your people and your process, right? I like to joke and say, just because you bought a car doesn't mean you know how to drive. And we find organizations buy security technology only to implement it sideways, if you will, right? So they don't do all the necessary protections. They don't. They put all their eggs in that one basket, right? Or they have one or two key individuals that run everything. And then what happens when that person wins the lottery or moves on to the next company? There's your security program falling by the wayside. So that diligence is definitely important. So I mentioned testing, I mentioned securing email, staff, right? And if you don't have the right staff, use the right managed services, right? Those are good ways to stay in the game. But the mindset, I think, is the most important thing of you are never done. You are never done. And so we got to keep doing it over and over again.
It's a journey, not a destination.
It is a journey. The criminals get smarter every day.
Well, and just like you're talking about, it's ever evolving. And so you have to stay on the cutting edge. And you also need experts who are out there scouring and making sure that they're ahead of it so that you're not behind. You have to be proactive with this. If something does happen, what are the steps that a business should take? Because just like you alluded to with the example, you want to be able to do it the right way. So what's your recommendation if your company's hit? What's the next step? How do you respond?
So great question. I would rather see an organization put a little effort in up front, right? You don't get to pick when you get hit. You don't get to pick when you're going to have that bad day, right? They do, right? And it's usually 10 after 3 in the morning, right? Just as an example. So get an incident response retainer. In fact, get 2, right? They're not breaking the bank, right? Get somebody in your corner that understands these things. And that's really the difference between a major event and a minor event, right? It might be something that you can just, get an quick investigation, figure out whether that's, low-hanging fruit, kind of a drive-by attack, if you will, versus you're a targeted company. You have data that's worth something to the bad guys. Off they go, right? So I say start with that. And then when you look at managed services and you do, say, make a decision to go to a third-party outsourcer for security managed services, look for things that are impactful to your business. Work with quality firms that want to do that kind of stuff, where it's one thing to get an alert, but it's another thing to get an alert and have an action done, right? So quarantine that host, kill that process at 10 after 3 in the morning, give me the ticket so when I come in at 8 o'clock, I get to see it, but it's already handled. That, I think, is better for all of us, all right?
What makes you hopeful? So when you look at the positive in terms of all of the things that are being done to combat this and to be proactive, what are some either specific or just general things that are hopeful for you for being ahead of this?
So I would say I get hope. I am a hopeful kind of person, right? I do see some glimmers of hope when I start to see organizations get smarter about it, right? In our business, we finally gotten to the point where our parents' generation know what we do for a living, right? But they've also been through 3 or 4 major breaches in their own life, right? They've gotten new credit cards and, monitoring and all these other things that go along with being compromised. But conversely, the pragmatist in me says there are still organizations that don't use multi-factor authentication, right? There are still organizations that have the best of intentions but didn't get there and they get compromised. And then you see compromise move downstream exponentially to affect all of us. When you see credit bureaus and other things get compromised, all of our data is valuable to the cyber criminal. So the better we do with monitoring and discussing what's happening in cyber, the better off we all are.
You bring up a couple of things that have me thinking. talk about professional and personal, because everything now is blended. And obviously with the remote hybrid work environment that we're in, when you talk about things like the multi-factor authentication, tongue twister right there, and then things like, the fact that all of our data is valuable,
right,
personally and professionally, how do we start protecting both sides of that? Because we're in a very interesting hybrid world right now where everything is out there for everyone to see.
Sure. I think we spend a lot of time online, and there's probably another social commentary about whether that should be the case or not. But I think Americans can do better in terms of protecting themselves. We see a lot of compromise, right? And when you start to see, let's say, compromise of something that is not necessarily critical infrastructure. So, for example, your grocery store chain, right? People go in and they sign up for the rewards program at the grocery store, the hardware store, what have you. It's mostly an email drip campaign. Give me some coupons. Let me know when there's a sale. Those types of things. It's not national security information, right? There's nothing juicy in there. But when you sign up for that account, what do you use? Your email address, right? Statistically, the average American has 22 online identities today, right? So think about that. Your Netflix, right? Your Gmail, your banking, your financial packages, whatever you got. Add them up, the average individual, 18 to 22. Statistically speaking, most people have 2.2 passwords. It's either this or it's that. And so when the grocery store gets compromised, suddenly that account gets tried everywhere. So the bad guys have a program, they've got a torrent, they've got a cannon, they've got something, they plug it in. Every financial service, every dating site, every social media platform, all of that is up for grabs, right? Conversely, you see people put a lot of faith in the password utilities that are out there. So legally, you can't mention them by name, but you put your eggs in that basket. What do the cyber criminals do? They go after that. And we see those getting compromised. So I like to teach people to do like a little personal spy tradecraft. Think like a spy. Think like a bad guy for a minute, right? Use complex passwords, right? But then you can write them down as well, right? Just never write down the full thing. Put something in your mind that says, hey, I'm going to use this password. I'm going to still use my email address because that's what they kind of quantify you to use anyway. Here's the password, but I'm going to keep this in my head that I always put these 4 special characters at the end of every one of those things or at the beginning of one of those things so that when they do get compromised, I'm not as compromised as the institution, so to speak, right? There's a more elegant way to say that, but I'm not as vulnerable, I guess is probably a better way to say that. So that works, I think, for a lot of individuals. What I find is people will resonate with that mentality. You secure your personal life, you understand what's relevant, and it's on us in corporate America to make sure that we're teaching our employees, secure your personal life because our business is important. Our customers are important. That data is important. People pay for that, right? Bad guys pay for that, right? So let's move forward. So I think those types of programs, when you do education amongst your employees, security awareness training, it's not just the October event, right? It is a year-long process. And then test them, right? Do the phishing campaigns, right? And then when they get it wrong, don't shame them, but provide that right education to make them better. And this is how it translates back into their personal lives.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to just like we were talking about, it's a journey, not a destination. And you're also, too, you're empowering and equipping them personally while obviously protecting yourself professionally. And so everyone wants to be a hero. And I like the fact, like you mentioned, think of yourself like a spy. So, you can be Ethan Hunt from Mission Impossible. You can be James Bond. So if you think like a spy, you can protect yourself and be better equipped. So wrap up on your end with contact information. Where can we go to learn more about Trustwave? Where can we go to follow your efforts and carry these conversations forward?
Yeah, trustwave.com. If you're on the government side of things, it's trustwavegovernmentsolutions.com. Stillwater ecosystem, right? And we're here to be of service to everyone.
Well, Steve, thank you for coming on the show. Greatly appreciate everything you do.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.